Alright guys, in this video we're going to do a little bit more on complex numbers. We're going to look at a little bit of algebra and like how to expand and divide brackets using complex numbers. Very important, obviously, before we start this, that we remember two key things. What we mean with a complex number is it's got this new rule that we've learned about square rooting a negative. If you square root -1, we represent the solution by using I. Obviously, if we go the other way, if we square this equation, so if I square I squared would become -1. Okay, because if I square this side, it gives me I squared. If I square the square root, they cancel each other out. So we know that I squared equals -1. And that's going to be very important for when we're manipulating complex numbers. Okay, so example 1 says expand and simplify. We've got two brackets multiplied together. You may want to draw on the arrows and do the smiley face if it's been a while since you've seen this. But we get 1 times by 1, which become 1. 1 times by -3i, which would be -3i. 2i times by 1, so that would become +2i. Now be careful with this bit. Okay, don't rush it. Like if you're going to go wrong anywhere, it's going to be here. So we're doing +2i times by -3i. So the way that I would do this, times the numbers together. So 2 times by -3 would give me -6. And then I times by I would be I squared. Okay, don't try and do too much at once. Leave your solution like this for now. Okay, so this times by this would become this. But don't stop there, like that's not the final answer. It says simplify your solution. And we know that if we get I squared, that's -1. So we can do a little bit more. We've got 1 -3i plus 2i, so that would become -1i. -6 I squared, which is -1, because we're doing -6 times by I squared, so we're really doing -6 times by -1. -6 times by -1 is +6. So we get +6. And then 1 plus 6 would be 7. So the answer we would be left with is 7 minus I. Okay, let's try one more. Okay, example 2, we've got I multiplied by 3 minus I multiplied by 2 plus 3i. You might want to pause this and have a go before I go through it. Okay, so we've got a couple of options how we do this. Essentially, we can multiply the two brackets together and then multiply all by I, or we could multiply one of the brackets by I, and then you've got two brackets and multiply them both out. I personally think the best way to do this is if you multiply the two brackets together first. So let's multiply these two brackets together first and then multiply everything by I. Just one little important side note, I've seen people do this in the past. Please do not do this, right? Sometimes when people are a little bit unfamiliar with the brackets from the GCSE, they make the mistake of thinking, oh, I is being times by all of this. So what they do is they multiply 3i and then minus I squared and then 2i and then plus 3i squared. Like, do not multiply both of these brackets by I inside both of them. That is just completely nonsense. Like, let's just think about that. Like, imagine if this was just, let's do really simple. We're doing 1, 2, 3 things. Like, mathematically, when I see this, we've got 3 things multiplied together. So if I said to you, what's 2 times 3 times 5? If you multiply the I into both of these brackets, what you're doing there is 2 times 3 and 2 times 5. And like, that is just not right, is it? Like, remember when you're multiplying things, these are just 3 separate things. You could do them in any order. Like, that would be the same as, like, that's clearly wrong, isn't it? It's not, you've just gained an extra 2. But that would be the same as 3 times 2 times 5. So we need to understand that when we're multiplying 3 things, we can do it in any order that we want, but we don't multiply anything twice. Okay? Sorry for that bit of waffle, but just be careful. Alright, so the way I'm going to do this is expand the two brackets first. So 3 times by 2 give me 6, plus 9i, minus 2i. And then be careful at this point. So 3 times by -1 would become -3. I times by I would be I squared. So let's tidy up this bracket first. Okay, we've got 6. Save me writing this all out again. I'm just going to highlight what this is. -3 I squared is -3 times -1. So that'll become plus 3. Okay, so we've got the real part, which is 6 plus 3, which is 9. The imaginary part is 9i minus 2i, so that become plus 7i. And then we expand it out, so that become 9i plus 7i squared. Don't think you're done there. I squared is minus 1, so 7i squared is 7 times minus 1. So we actually get minus 7 plus 9i. Okay. Next, let's look at dividing complex numbers. Okay, so example 1, it says express 1 plus 3i divided by 1 minus 2i in the form a plus bi. This bit here just means where a and b are elements of the real numbers. So that a is going to be a real number, b is going to be a real number, but together we will get a complex number because it's real and imaginary. Okay, so this one involves a bit of a trick that you need to probably remember for the AS Further Maths. Okay, so I would highlight this. If you want to divide one complex number by another and end up with just a single complex number instead of two being divided, the way that we need to do this is we look at the denominator, and if it's 1 minus 2i, we multiply the top and the bottom. Remember how fractions work. As long as I multiply it on the top and the bottom by the same thing, it's going to keep the fraction the same, but we're aiming to write it in a different way. And if we've got 1 minus 2i on the bottom, we multiply by 1 plus 2i. Now if you multiply by 1 plus 2i on the bottom, we have to multiply by 1 plus 2i on the top. Open up some brackets. And we'll expand this out. But just highlight what we've done there, okay? So we multiply by the conjugate of the denominator. And what we mean when we say conjugate, it's just the complex. Think about when we were solving quadratics, we got conjugate pairs, didn't we? So if it was 1 minus 2i, we multiply by 1 plus 2i. And that's the way that the solutions to quadratics come. They come in conjugate pairs. 3 plus or minus I, 5 plus or minus 4i. So if we've got 1 minus 2i, we multiply by the conjugate, which is 1 plus 2i, on the top and the bottom. But that was where our focus was. Okay, so the original question had 1 minus 2i. That's where you look. And then you multiply by the conjugate on the top and the bottom. Okay, all we've now got to do is just expand it out and see what we get. Okay, so let's do the top first. 1 times 1 plus 3i plus 2i plus 6i squared. And on the bottom, you'll soon realise why we do this, by the way. So if you multiply the bottom, we get 1 times by 1. We get minus 2i, and we get plus 2i, and they cancel. And then we've got minus times a plus, so that'd be minus 4i squared. The reason why we multiply by the conjugate is when you do that, these middle terms always cancel each other out, and look what happens. Okay, so on top we've got, that would become minus 6, because it's I squared, so minus 6. 1 minus 6 would be minus 5, plus 5i, divided by 1. Minus 4, I squared is minus 1. So minus 4 times minus 1, that's going to be plus 4. So we've got 1 plus 4. So we've got minus 5 plus 5i divided by 5. So can you see what's happened? Like, the answer that we're trying to get to was just a real and an imaginary part. And because we originally had one complex number divided by another complex number, if you multiply by the conjugate, you end up with a real number on the bottom. And then that would just be simplifying down to minus 5 divided by 5 would be minus 1 plus 5 divided by 5, maybe plus 1i. Okay, you've seen this before almost in another topic at GCSE. Think about when you're rationalising a third. So say if I had 3 divided by 1 plus root 2, and you were trying to rationalise that third, remember the way that you would have done it is you would multiply. You call it rationalising the denominator, don't you? In this question, we haven't rationalised the denominator, we've like made the denominator real. Realised the denominator, that's not like a real thing, but we've realised the denominator. Like if we were trying to rationalise this, you'd look at your denominator, if it was 1 plus root 2, you'd multiply by 1 minus root 2. And the reason that you do that is the bit in the middle cancels out, and you get a real thing on the bottom. Okay, let's try one more. Okay, so this one's actually like more simple than the last one, but people get a little bit thrown up by this one because you think, well, if there's I on the bottom, like what do we multiply by? Now remember, all we're trying to do in this topic is we're trying to get rid of, like, we don't want a complex number divided by another complex number. So we're looking at the bottom and we're trying to turn it into a real number. Okay? Have it maybe pause and think about what you could multiply the top and the bottom by for this question. Now, technically, there's 2 possible ways you could do this. Now, if I asked you what's the conjugate of I, the answer would be minus I. So you could multiply the top and the bottom by minus I if you want to, and that will work. As long as you multiply it on the top and the bottom. Just think about it on the bottom, when you get your I squared, you get minus 1, it becomes a real number. You could actually, to be honest, just ditch the minuses on this question. You can just multiply, if you multiply the top and the bottom by I, you have a few less negatives to worry about. I mean, to be honest, it doesn't matter. You can use minus I or you could use I, as long as you do the same on the top and on the bottom. I'm just going to multiply the top and the bottom by I. Okay, so that would give me 3, let's not do too much at once, 3i squared plus I times I would be I squared. Okay, so then we'd get 3i squared, so I squared is minus 1. So 3 times minus 1 would be minus 3 plus I, all divided by I squared, which is minus 1. Don't leave a negative on the denominator, okay? So minus 3 divided by minus 1 becomes plus 3. Plus I divided by minus 1 becomes minus I. So that's it, okay? Just one last quick one before we finish. Say, for example, if we would have had 2 divided by 4 plus 3i, just to be sure we're clear on this, you would multiply the top and bottom. So you'd be looking at your denominator, 4 plus 3i, the conjugate would be 4 minus 3i. So we'd just multiply the top and bottom by 4 minus 3i. If we had, I don't know, 3 minus I all divided by 1 minus 7i. Again, your focus is just on your denominator, and you'd multiply the top and the bottom by 1 plus 7i. Alright guys, hope that was of some use.